Um, Thanks, Annie, for the intro, and thank you everyone who is here today. So I too fast skipped the slide that I wanted to talk about. So, like Annie mentioned, these are the 7 principles of community engagement that came out of our consultations with the communities, and today we'll be focusing on reciprocity. In advance, I want to apologize for the memory is full message that keeps showing on my computer. So hopefully it doesn't disturb you too much. So reciprocity. Um, as usual, we are going to start with a story today, as we do with every Launch and Learn. And today's story is going to be about a program that we started with our partners. It's called the Community Partner Exchange Program. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of what it is and how it relates to this question of reciprocity. So the Partner Exchange Program is, as the name says, a program where our different community partners in different places of the world have a chance to do an exchange. So they'll go and visit each other's communities and build relationship and do different projects with each other. Um, the idea to have this program actually started when we were asking our partners during the consultations, early stages, what reciprocity between our office and the community would mean for them. And the answers that were common to a couple and a few of our partners were, well, true reciprocity would be for our youth to have the same opportunities to travel and experience these programs just like the students at the U of M do. So that was a real eye-opener for us in terms of what reciprocity really meant to our indigenous community partners. So we started this program. And what was also really interesting for us to learn about this answer is that when we asked about reciprocity, they didn't say, "Oh, we want more money," or "We want to go visit the U of M." They said, "We want to go and spend time, build relationships with other communities who are doing similar work than we are doing, and who are engaging the same struggles and same projects." So to us, really what that means is that reciprocity, what they were asking for was something that was just about them, just about the communities, that didn't have a direct benefit to the university, to our office, to our students, but that allowed them the space and the resources to work on the projects that they wanted to work on. So, I mean, again, that was a real eye opener for us and for me. So we started these exchanges. So here's a photo of Gisela from Amupaquin going on the plane, waving at us. And we started these exchanges. One of the first exchanges that happened was 2 youth from Amupaquin, which is a small collective of midwives in the Amazon region of Ecuador. 2 youth from there traveled to the island of Chiloe in Chile to join our program, Chile Art Community and Resistance. And they were hosted by our community partners in Chile, a female collective of artists called MICA, Movimiento Insular Comunidad Artística. So MICA, in preparation, they decided to use part of their program budget this year to host a gathering of Mapuche midwives and open the doors to mothers, women, and the public in general in their community to come and learn how the midwives in Ecuador did their work. And this is a photo of our gathering. It was really beautiful space, very welcoming. And for Alex and Gisela, was the first time that they had an audience of people to listen to how they did things in their community. So it was a really beautiful experience. And in terms of program outcomes, had nothing to do with our program, which was also very special to have this component added to our work. So the following year, we did the other side of the exchange. So we sponsored 2 artists from MICA in Chile to come and travel and join our Amazon Rainforest Experience program in Ecuador, which we offer in partnership with Emopaquin Collective. And this was the second time that Mika had come to the community. And what was really cool is that that year, when we arrived to the community, I was surprised to see that the number of local indigenous youth had tripled. Like, I've never had so many Quechua youth in our program before. And later I found out that they came because they heard stories about the Chilean dancers and like the beautiful workshops that they did, which was obviously better than my workshops. Well, that's okay. So what these exchanges really told us and our office is the importance of reciprocity as something that goes above and beyond what we owe our partners and payer communities in in exchange for the services that we need, and also to support them to do the things that they want to do that don't relate to the university and the work that we do ourselves. Um, Now, these exchanges were the decisions that the community made in terms of what reciprocity meant for them, but it's not the only way, and it's not how it will apply for everyone. So through the presentation, we'll explore this question to help us find ways of finding what reciprocity can look like in our engagement with indigenous communities. So, what is reciprocity? Before we even get into that question, we, during the consultations, found out that we carrying in our heads assumptions about what reciprocity looks like between indigenous communities and universities. And two big assumptions were that indigenous communities automatically benefit from partnering with universities. And the other one is that payments, funding, contributions, gifts to indigenous communities are acts of reciprocity. So those were two big assumptions that we had in our heads. The reality when we talk to our partners is that they in fact see very little tangible, lasting, and meaningful benefits from their engagement with us. And that the main beneficiary of indigenous community engaged partnerships is actually the university, not the communities. This was shared from our partners, but it's also well documented in the literature. I mean, we need our partners to offer programs for the university to fulfill their education, research, and community service mandates. Other big reality checks is that, like I mentioned before, payments, fundings, contribution, gifts, these do not constitute acts of reciprocity to our partners. This is what we owe them in exchange for the services and resources that they're sharing with us. And here I have a quote from one of the partners that we interviewed, Christina Koch, Kechimaya PhD student from Belize. She said, communities have always given more than they receive. Reciprocity will always be something we strive towards. So this idea that we always take more from them than they give to us, than we give to them. So we have to find a way of creating that reciprocity in a meaningful way. So what is reciprocity? The main thing to remember here is that, like in the case of our community partner exchanges, reciprocity can only be defined and experienced by the people in a relationship. And in this context, the indigenous communities with whom we work. That means that when we go into relationship building or to create a partnership, we don't already know what reciprocity is going to look like for that relationship, because it can only be arrived through conversation, relationship building, listening, and following the lead of our community partners. So reciprocity is not a transaction. It's not a payment. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It is actually, as we found out through our consultations, the practice of caring for the relationships we find valuable. Reciprocity goes beyond the things we owe to indigenous communities as partners, friends, as settlers on indigenous lands, because it's not just the services and resources that we exchange in our work, it's also as settlers, we owe them something. So another great quote from Christina that illustrates this, she said, reciprocity is an act of community. It is grounded on a sense of interdependence, a commitment to each other, and respect for each other's dignity. So not necessarily about money, not necessarily about resources, but it's a relationship and the act of caring for that relationship that really matters. So reflecting on reciprocity, and this is a bit of a personal reflection. Um, so reciprocity connects and actualizes our personal, institution, and political feelings of accountability to a community. So I have a photo here of one of my favorite moments I shared with Yamupakin Collective. I was sitting by the river with two of the midwives, the mamas, and they were telling me about how they have seen the Amazon region change from when there was no roads, no businesses, no um, synthetic homes like we have today, and how the healthcare system came in and displaced the midwives and the different political struggles that they've had. And like to me, that this is something that I could have never gotten from a textbook or a lecture in a class. It's something very special and a very special understanding of reality that was gifted to me. So in a way, to me, this makes me reflect on like this is such a precious gift. How can I reciprocate that? And given my role in the university and my political positionality as a settler in Canada, as displaced migrant from the global south, all these things come into place as to how I can reciprocate this gift that was given to me by my community partners. So thinking of the different levels that reciprocity plays in a relationship, through our consultations, we distilled reciprocity into three different levels. So reciprocity of position, reciprocity of rules, and reciprocity of opportunity. Again, these are all part of the same relationship of reciprocity, but they're the different levels at which that relationship plays out in a partnership. So the first one, reciprocity of position. So this has to do with recognizing the sovereignty and expertise of indigenous people and communities we work with. It's sort of the idea of putting their expertise at the same level as ours as staff or faculty at the university. But also creating opportunities for people to hold formal and informal positions and receive remuneration and resources for their work. So a very quick example from my own practice with Amupakin, the community of midwives in the Quichua community of midwives in the Amazon region. What we do with our programs is that we establish hourly wages for them that are comparable to, comparable in some way to hourly wages in Canada. So when one of the midwives spends an hour with us, she gets paid an hourly wage that will be comparable to what I would get paid here in Canada. And then for the volunteers and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not one-to-one, but it's an effort to make it as fair as possible. Reciprocity of rules. So this is the idea that our Indigenous community partners should not be subjected to greater barriers and restrictions than we are here at the university. And they should have access to comparable power and influence in a partnership to design it, develop it, and also have a significant say on the projects we do together. So another quick example here, a practice that I have also with Amupakin and Mika is to do a collaborative budgeting. So when we're planning our program, I pretty much say this is the pot of money that we have to do this program. These are the expenses that are outside of anyone's control, like travel. Let's organize how we want to spend everything else. And at the beginning, this can be challenging because we are not used to budgeting in these kind of ways. It requires a lot of listening, patience, and communication. But in the end, it's the only way to really level the field in a meaningful way, at least financially. Reciprocity of opportunity. So this is basically the idea of the exchanges. It's the idea of making sure that indigenous communities get to experience as much recognition, wealth, and experience as our students, ourselves, and the university. So what the communities were asking when we asked them about reciprocity was basically the same opportunities that our youth or students have, but for the youth in their communities. And they needed the financial support to make that happen, and that's what we facilitated. So these are the three levels of reciprocity. Um, Now, before we can even begin to build reciprocity, there are some basic conditions that need to be in place so that we can begin this work. And basically, I mean, these conditions are what is owed to our partners. This is not reciprocity, it's nothing above and beyond, it's just what we owe them. Reciprocity is what happens, on top of that. So, through our consultations, again, we found out some of these basic conditions. So, the first condition working with indigenous communities is to follow protocols. This is a basic, very basic form of respect and recognition. So, example from my practice, this is a Jejipun ceremony in Chile. It's a Mapuche ceremony to basically start things in a good way. So when we travel with our students, we talked to the community and they said, well, before we can do this program, we need to do the ceremony, which meant allocating resources to pay the community members, to finance the materials, to give honorariums to the people involved. So this can happen in all areas of our work with, and should happen with all areas of our work with indigenous communities. Follow community protocols. The second one has number 3, but it's the second one, is to, well, no, this should be there you go. The second one is to remunerate community work. So something that very often happens in community organizing, but also working with indigenous community partners, is that we'll be attending our meeting, meeting with community on their salary time, but the community are coming on their own time. They're getting a community contribution, they might be getting funding, but they're not getting paid to be sitting in that meeting, spending their time. So, I mean, an example of remunerating the community, is to ask who is doing free work in here, who is not getting paid for this. But the basic idea is to pay people and pay for the services and time and resources that we're taking from the communities. It's very, very, I think, straightforward. The third one is resourcing the community. And I think the best way of thinking about this is avoiding to take resources away from the community. One example from Annie's practice here is that whenever she travels up north to visit indigenous communities that have boil water advisories, she brings enough water with her to, replace what her team and her students herself will drink, but also to leave some behind for the community once she leaves. So again, the basic idea is, if we're going to be working with indigenous communities, we know that indigenous communities have been systematically oppressed, and they're lacking resources because of that systemic oppression. We shouldn't be taking more away. We should be bringing some things into the community. And again, this is not reciprocity. These are the foundations so that reciprocity can even begin to be possible. So at this point, we talked about the conditions of reciprocity. We talked about the 3 different levels of reciprocity. We want to have a quick reflection exercise with folks, and ask a question, put people in groups to chat about it, and then come back and have a bit of a discussion about what comes out of those conversations. So the question is, again, the background to the question is, since we know that universities and institutions are the main beneficiaries of Indigenous community engagement, and we know that practicing reciprocity with Indigenous communities means showing care and respect above and beyond what is owed to them in exchange for services and resources that we need to run our programs, teach students, do research, etc. The question is, what are some concrete ways in which you could show reciprocity to the Indigenous communities you work with, either at a personal or at institutional level, or both? So the community partner exchange program was one example in which we can concretely show reciprocity to our partners. Now we're interested in hearing how you think you could show this reciprocity to the Indigenous communities you work with. Again, this will not be the definitive way because this has to be the result of a conversation with your partners. But we just want to hear about some ideas that you might have about how can reciprocity be demonstrated to your partners. So as we usually do, Nikki is going to help and put people into breakout rooms. We're going to give folks 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to check in at 5 minutes, see how people are doing. If people need more time, we'll extend it. So we'll be checking with folks before we bring people back into the main room. Before we bring people back, there will be a message that will say, we're closing the room. And I think this time we're giving people 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes before we close the room. So that should be a signal for folks to wrap up the conversation, because we really hate cutting people mid-sentence. It's a horrible feeling. So we want to avoid that. So I can't see the chat, but I imagine that Annie or Nikki put the question in the chat, so you will be able to refer back to it during your conversations. And I think I see Nikki is focusing very hard, so I know she's creating those breakout rooms. And maybe I'll just let you tell folks when it's time.
I think, Hedda, let's definitely do 10 minutes, just because I think it is a little hard to have enough of a conversation in 5 minutes. So Nikki, did you, if you have it, the question is in the chat, and then we'll do 10 minutes. So we'll give you your 2-minute countdown, like just before 12:45, folks.
All right, so working towards reciprocity. These are 5 very concrete practices that we heard during our consultations for working towards reciprocity. If you remember early on, I said that I quoted a partner saying that reciprocity is something that you work towards, but it's not something that you can easily, and sometimes you can't ever truly achieve. So some ways to work towards reciprocity. The first one is share first and share often with your Indigenous community partners. I mean, we come from, in our case, from a wealthy university with lots of resources and lots of power and access to connections. So when thinking about reciprocity, we should be the first ones to extend that relationship to the community, not wait for the community to give and then us to reciprocate, so to say. The second thing we heard is that we need to design our initiatives or programs or partnerships for community benefit. I mean, that is pretty self-explanatory, designing in a way that benefits the community, but what is not super clear is that what that benefit is, who gets to decide what that benefit is, and benefit for who, etc. So the main thing to remember here is to always make it explicit to the community. These are the ways that we're proposing that you will benefit from this project. In our consultations, we heard a couple times people saying, well, we engage in this, but we don't know how we are supposed to benefit from this project. You know, how do we benefit from it, was a quote from an Indigenous community partner we interviewed. So make it explicit. This is how the community will benefit. This is what we think that you will benefit. And then the follow-up would be the conversation. How do you think and how would you like to benefit? from this initiative, this partnership, this program. And something else to add to this one is that many communities that we interviewed had never gone through this conversation. So no one has ever asked them, how would you like to benefit? And because of that, they have never thought of possible ways of benefit. No, they had never thought that possible ways of benefiting were possible beyond just money, funding, resources, etc. So when we begin to have these conversations like we did with Amutakin and Mika, and they said, well, actually, the benefit in reciprocity would be the chance to travel and experience, the programs that your students do. So just to keep in mind that those conversations can be very important and very crucial, and to give them the time that they need. The third practice that we heard is to extend real opportunities. So, most of us, every one of us working with Indigenous community partners, come to the table with really, important goals, but sometimes these are long-term goals, not something that will happen immediately or, even within the lifespan of your project. So it is important to extend real, concrete, immediate opportunities for the communities to benefit from their engagement with us and our institutions. Fourth is to share and divest our power and wealth. So during our consultations, we were reminded by a faculty member at the university that Indigenous communities and community partners in general will most likely see us as more powerful and resourceful than we actually are, just because we represent the university. So they don't see only our faces, they see the university standing behind us. And in a way, they are right. So we should use that position, that power, that wealth that we can access from the big institution we represent to support community partners and divest some of that wealth and some of resources to support the projects that they have, whether or not they benefit the university, our careers, and ourselves in a personal way. The last one is to engage in relational accountability. So we touched on the idea of Indigenous accountability, relational accountability before, but this is the idea of approaching our relationships in a holistic way and thinking about all of the ways in which we benefit and are related to our Indigenous community partners at a personal, institutional, political, academic level, etc. Then trying to honor all of those levels. I only have 1 minute left, so I want to come back to point 4 just to say something that I skipped that I think is important. Regarding sharing and divesting power and wealth, one of the things that came up through the consultation is the importance of intervening and stepping up when we encounter anti-Indigenous racism and different forms of systemic oppression in our work. So either coming from colleagues, even from ourselves, but also from the system, the bureaucracy in which these partnerships are built into. So just like Luke was saying earlier, we are in a position where we can move to create those systemic changes to make the work better, more fair, and easier for everyone. So those are the 5 practices that we heard during the consultations for working towards reciprocity. So it is 2 o'clock, and we are gonna end the part of the presentation here and invite folks to stay for the second part of today's session, which is the community engagement advising circle, where we can go deeper into any questions, share knowledge and experiences related to Indigenous community engagement in our own practice. Today, we're very honored, very happy to have Marla Robson from Indigenous student recruitment at the U of M, who will be sharing her experiences and her practices with us and sharing some advice with folks. Also, Annie and Nikki, I don't know if you want to add anything to the session before we move on to the second part.
I think we'll just run through the closing part of this. So thank you everyone for joining the session today. Our next Lunch and Learn will be on Thursday, April 8th, and Nikki Furland will be presenting on protocol. And if you haven't joined our mailing list yet, Nikki's going to drop that into the chat again. And this will have the YouTube recording for this week. And yeah, feel free to invite other colleagues to these lunch hour sessions. Folks, we'll say goodbye to people who have to leave. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll be starting the Community Engagement Advising Circle in a minute or so.